happy that makes me. I listened to your comment about people who are 70 and up struggling with technology. I am not yet 70 and I am still struggling with the new technology. So to be very honest, the fact that you can see what I'm seeing really makes me very happy at this point. I do have one announcement that I'll start with because I've seen a lot of your faces in the Genealogy Center. And I wanted just to let you know, we are open for business and we have been open since June. So I know people are being cautious and staying home when available, but we're all here. And if anybody does want to come in and do research, you can do that. We have staff available to help. The only deal is it's masks. You know, we have a mask requirement. So if that applies to anybody, I'll look forward to seeing you as we come around. So today's class is on dating old photos. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. And I'm going to start by building my credibility and then immediately destroy it for you. And that is that I have worked long and hard. I've done a lot of research on dating old photographs. And I can tell you without a doubt that if you show me a photograph, I won't be able to date it. But that's because there are very, very many elements involved in this. A lot of places, this is just not an exact science. And in fact, the goal we're going to have with dating old photographs is always going to be to get within a range of 5 to 10 years. If I wanted to explain that quickly, I would say the following. If you see someone in a wedding photograph, if you see a woman in a wedding photograph and her dress appears to be older, that does not mean that the photograph is older. There is a tradition of handing wedding dresses from generation to generation. And that alone is going to put kind of a wrinkle in there when we get around to the something borrowed aspect of wedding dresses. And so we're going to do the best we can. And Wayne, I hear you talking about the photo that you found or that was found for you. And you are the perfect example of what how we're going to do this, because you're going to need to use your other research to support the dating process. It's very tough to start with a photo and end up with a date without having some preliminary information. So with that, let's get started. Again, where to begin? You're going to begin with things that you already know. Genealogy always starts with what you know and what you can confirm. In the photo that you have here, the 1900 census says that the couple who are on the bottom row, the older of the two on the bottom row, that they had 5 girls and 2 boys and a grandchild living with them in 1900. So if I look at this and I generalize who the boys and the girls are, I can figure out who the grandchild is, and I can look at this and use those census records to then date this photo. I also know the census said that they had a granddaughter with them, and in fact, he is my great uncle Cecil. So he would not have been overly happy to be identified as a granddaughter, but I can use his date of birth to really get this within 5 to 10 years, because he's the little baby in the photo. And remember that babies in photos wore dresses. Baby boys wore dresses, wore gowns, as well as baby girls. So you can't look at that child in the picture and say, oh, well, that's a girl, although the census taker probably did. We're going to, you want to also consider the source of the photo. I was lucky enough when my parents moved, when they downsized house, I inherited 75 legal boxes of genealogy. They overtook my dining room for pretty much 2.5 years. And in that process, the good news about them, my parents had file foldered everything. The bad news was that there were 5 files that had the same surname on it, or there were 10 files that had the same surname. So their system of organization had a couple of breakdowns in it. However, when I found those old photographs in the folder, they were filed by family name. So I had a little bit of a boost as far as who was in each photo. And in some cases, I knew the source of the photo. I knew this came from grandma's collection, and I knew which grandmother. So that helped me immediately rule out half of the family and then just start tweaking it from there. But again, with this, we're always going to go with the research that you have prior to this to help match up those elements within the photo. By the way, if you have a question, I do have a way to know that. Looks like I have a chat, and feel free to interrupt me at any point in time. I don't think I said that. But so today's class is going to have these 4 different elements to it. We're going to be talking about the type of the photo. In other words, what film process was used to create that photo. We're going to look at the G part as far as what gathering is this. Remember that especially as we get back into photos, going to have your photo taken was an event. It was a family event, especially prior to 1900. And so there might be a reason for the photo, and that's going to help us put a time frame on that photo. We're going to look the third one down, and yes, I am the acronym queen. You can ask anybody here. TGIF is intentional. But that I on the third one, there is information on a photo that tells us often as much as the information in the photo. And so what's going on in the general area of the photo, what's going on around the frame, things like that. And then the last part is going to be fashion. And this is where my knowledge, there are huge degrees in fashion education. And it would probably take one of those to be able to trim all of this out. But there are some things that we can all learn to look for, and that's what we're going to cover in this class. Any questions so far?
No.
Pretty good.
Okay. So this is a little bit audience participation. They should have told you that. But really, what I want to acknowledge on this timeline, hang on, I got to chat, I'm going to see who it is. On this timeline, you can see, oops, my bad. Okay, you can see the earliest photography methods, and you're going to see some ranges over on the left-hand side for when those photo styles and when those photography methods were in vogue. And probably the first thing you'll realize if you're a numbers person is there's a whole lot of overlap on that chart. And so you can't really look and say, I have an ambrotype, therefore it is dated. Okay, you can't do that because there's a 10-year span. Well, I guess you can with that one, there's a 10-year span. But as you're looking at these, ambrotypes were being created at the same time as tintypes and at the same time as daguerreotypes and at the same time as the carte de visites. So while we can look at a chart like this and say, well, if I have a tintype, those are the metal ones that they're kind of flexible. They're actually built on iron. We know it doesn't predate 1856, but you'll notice with tintype, there is a huge range for tintypes. And so that little, 89-year range is not very helpful to us when we're trying to date a photo of someone who probably didn't live outside that range. I should also tell you that the source on this particular chart is a book called Camera Clues, which is wonderful. But the reason that I wanted to point that out is that you're going to read other resources that give you other dates for these starting and ending parts of the procedures. So this particular source, it kind of matched the other sources better. There's a wide range of startup and ending in this. We also want to remember along the way that ancestors who did these earlier photos, they had a number of things to overcome. The earliest of the photos, people had to go to the studio to have those photos taken. So there was travel involved. They also, those early photos, sometimes took 20 to 30 minutes to develop for the image to attach itself to the glass or to the surface. And so they would have to attach still for a significant period of time. And so that's, just still another one. That's why you're not going to see very many smiles. You're not going to see very many pets, and you're not going to see very many babies that are not being held down by their mothers, for lack of a better term. It just took too long for that image. And so a moving object would blur in the picture. And so they would avoid that. The other thing about these earliest methods, and I mean the very earliest, they were often costly. And so you're just not going to see a lot of these earlier methods that are there. Over the years, Cameras are going to change. Film is going to become an element. The cost is going to go significantly down. And now we've got them on our cell phones, and we've got digital options that we just take pictures right and left and get rid of the ones we don't want. So again, from these earliest photos that were very precious, there's just a lot of changes in the process. So let's talk just a little bit about each one. Daguerreotypes, they are copper plated. They were treated with a silver substance and other chemicals. And the way that you can tell a daguerreotype, the two ways that are probably the most common, they are almost always in a mat or in a frame because they are fragile. And so those that have survived from the mid-1800s, they're still probably going to be in some sort of encasement so that they have survived over time. They have a mirror-like surface. So when you look at a daguerreotype front on, it looks differently than if you look at the side view. From the side, it has a very reflective quality. And in fact, the letters even flip mirror images on a daguerreotype. Oliver Wendell Holmes calls photography the mirror with a memory. And that's because of that reflective surface in the process. If you do happen to have a daguerreotype, lucky you, they're extremely rare. There are a couple down at the Nelson Art Gallery, but you want to look at the mat. You can see on this one, let's see if I can play with this a little bit. You can see on this particular slide, down in the bottom right on the mat, it gives us Anson 589 Broadway. That's going to be a clue as to where this was taken. So now we're going to be able to use other tools to figure out when that particular address was held by some sort of a photographic studio. We're going to use city directories then to look those up. You'll also notice on this slide, and by the way, your handout should be these same slides. You'll notice at the very bottom of this particular slide that it gives you a place to look up it's a registry of Daguerrean studios. And so Craig's camera has gone through and made a list of these are studios that were creating daguerreotypes. So if we were able to find one at 589 Broadway, then we would know a little bit more about the when and the where this might have been taken. By the way, if you want to know who this is Joseph Jenkins Roberts, and it was taken in 1851. Kind of get your head wrapped around some time frames here. Does anybody know who Roberts was? Roberts was a gentleman who went from Virginia to Liberia. That is the opposite direction of most of our research. But he was the vice colonial governor of the Commonwealth of Liberia. And he becomes the governor. He serves as the first and the 7th president of Liberia. So we talked earlier about the fact that images were rare from this time frame and expensive. He was quite an important person, and it's not surprising that he's in that photo. So moving into the next type that was developed, these are going to be called ambrotypes. Like daguerreotypes, these are negatives, so they're going to have something behind them to make the image show. It's either going to be a dark fabric or it's going to be dark paper to make it show up a little bit better. However, these do not have the reflective quality of a daguerreotype. So if you look at these from the side, you pretty much see the same thing as what you see from the beginning. They can be viewed at any angle. Ambrotypes are going to almost exclusively be portraits. They were less expensive to create, so we're going to find more of them around, but they're still going to have that, they're glass, so they're still likely going to be in some sort of a frame. And again, we're using silver nitrate, we're treating this with chemicals, and the chemicals adhere to the plate, and that's how they make the image. Tin types. I found in those 75 legal boxes, at least a dozen tin types. They were not only popular, but they were inexpensive. This is where it's first starting to be available to the masses. They're called tin types, but they were also called ferrotypes because they aren't really tin, they're iron. And so it is another wet plate process where you take the chemicals are treated across this gooey, yes, in my notes I say gooey, it's called collodion, but it's a gooey substance that the chemicals then adhere to, and that makes the image in the process. It was not important, not necessary to put these in a case because they are virtually indestructible. I took my tin types. I am a retired middle school, I'm a retired teacher. Let's go with that. I'm a retired school teacher. And yes, 39 years. That's why I teach like a freight train. We're going to get through this whole thing. But in the process, I shared tin types. Wayne, the woman next to you, is probably my best friend, I can tell. In the process, I shared these tin types with my 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, and they passed them around the room, and there's not a bit of damage to them. They would have been often sealed with a protective varnish, and it really held the image in. So this becomes, you'll notice that the time frame on tin types again extends past World War II, and that's because of other changes that are happening. So in the beginning, we had glass. Everything it adhered to glass. Tin types, which are going to be, again, on a thin sheet of iron, it's going to take a special camera. And that camera, the cameras that were developed in the middle of the tin, or when tin types were coming around, they were portable. The cameras all of a sudden could, the technology had changed so that the photographer could develop the film where they were. Rather than you having to go to the studio was mobile all of a sudden. And that's going to change everything in the process. These cameras are going to be, the cost is going to drop, the volume is going to increase. And the reason that time frame lasts so long on tin types is they become novelty items at carnivals. So I grew up in the age where you sat in the booth and you put your dollar in and you got your 4 photos for $1 and you made goofy faces and it spit it out of the machine. These are kind of the predecessor to those machines. But now, instead of it being a planned family event where you went to the photographers, you dressed up in your Sunday best and you took the buggy to the photographer, now you can say, hey, we should have a photo taken and have the tin type photographer take it for you. So again, it's not only a change of technology and cost, affordability, but it also is a change, it kind of becomes an impulse buy. If you're not sure which of these you have, tin types you can pick them up with a magnet, they're iron. So if you have a magnet and you hold the magnet over the top of it and it sucks up to the magnet, you likely have a tin type. However, if those ambrotypes were treated with a metal backed substance with some sort of, remember, they have to have something behind them to show. It's possible that some ambrotypes will also adhere to a magnet. So, carte de visites. These are the first ones that most of us have hanging around. Were plentiful. The one on the bottom has more of an albumin treated. That's the egg white treating. They show up as kind of a yellow-brown image. They get cracky over time. They start to fade over time. They're mostly portraits, although there are some landmarks. And just about the same time, just a little bit later, cabinet cards come out that are larger. They become much more popular. Again, they're not extremely expensive, so it's going to be photography that the masses had available to them. The 2 images in this slide are roughly proportional. So the carte de visites were about that much smaller than a cabinet card. So in the other process, you'll see that the bottom picture does have that cracky, kind of a yellowy tint to it. The top one does not. And that's because somewhere around about 1890, they came out with a film process that did black and white film. And so no longer had to use the egg whites in order to get them on there. That doesn't mean that the egg white or the albumin coated paper goes away at that point in time, because it still was a process in use. But if you have the black and white version, it means you're probably looking at a photo that you could date after 1890, because that's when that black and white process becomes more available. Let's see, carte de visites. If you're looking at a carte de visite, the earliest of them, those that were created before 1870, are almost always going to have squared off corners. So this kind of leads into a little bit of fashion, but now we're talking about the fashion of the photo itself rather than the fashion of the person, whoever's in the photo. So that those 1870 squared off corners is something that you can look for. And then if you're looking at the photo in the very bottom left, we could look at not only the young lady, look at the style of her clothing, but there's another important style in that photo, and it's in the background. She is standing on the front stoop or a front step somewhere, and there is ironwork in the background that with some research, you can date that iron photo, that ironwork. You'll probably notice one other thing in that bottom left. If you've got a screen that's big enough to let you see it, it says at the bottom, World's Fair Photo View Company. And then it's on Finney Avenue, and it's in St. Louis, Missouri. So knowing that the St. Louis World's Fair was in 1904, we already kind of have a leg up on when that photo might have been created. And actually, it's right after that. That photo is right around 1904, 1905, which I know from other research of the person in the photo. Okay. Postcards. Postcards kind of came into fashion around the turn of the century. And there's a couple of things we can use about a postcard that are very, very helpful. They help us narrow that 10-year span much smaller. These are going to be actual photos that when they were developed, they adhered them to cardstock. So it's a photo that gets glued onto something that is going to become a postcard, possibly sent through the mail. It could also have just been handed out. It didn't have to have been mailed. But you'll notice on this slide, there is a date that is of utmost importance, and I'm going to give you another one with it. Before 1902, the United States Postal Service only allowed an address to be placed on the back of the card. No special messages, no, hi mom, I'm fine, nothing on the back of the card other than the address that it was being sent to. And so if you have, when you're looking at a postcard, look on the back, and if it is address only, you can assume that it was sent prior to 1902. In 1907, and yes, I know there's a gap between those, in 1907, you get what are called the split window postcards. And again, I grew up in an age where the postcard had a line down the middle, and on one side you put the address, and on the other side you put the newsy letter about whatever you wanted to send to the person along with the image on the back. And so that 1907 is when that split window is developed as a standard printed postcard. So if you have that split window, you know your postcard does not predate 1907 because that's when the first of those pre-printeds came out. We can look at images there. We can assume that the woman, in this photo, the largest of the postcards on this screen, we can assume that she probably did not dress like that on a regular basis. Plus, if again, it's very small on the image, but it says Butler Cafe Review, Seattle. So she is a performer of some sorts. We could date that photo by finding out when the Butler Cafe Review was running in the state of Washington, in the city of Seattle. We can also look at some of the costume elements, the height of the heel. But again, if she's a performer, that's going to throw some of what she's wearing into a whole different pile of fashion. So a little bit less easy to do, less easy to date that way. So most of us grew up with roll film. We grew up with a roll that went into the camera and you did something with it. So there are some important dates in the top of this slide. Film, and of course it's going to be Kodak film, it's Eastman Kodak. That's developed in 1885. So along with that chart that had all these other different processes going on in the 1800s, this is another one that kind of comes into play. But they really didn't become popular until 1900. And in 1900, the first publicly available, inexpensive camera was sold. And it was the box Brownie. You could buy it for $1. And at that point in time, photography changes again all over the place. Now, instead of getting dressed up and going to the studio or even going down to the carnival to have your photo taken, you can take pictures yourself of things around the house. You can take pictures of your house. This is a family gathering. This is a family reunion. This is a meeting of people who got together for a reason and had their photograph. You know, church socials were prominent places where we see a lot of these photos. But starting at 1900, photography is available. They actually sold 100,000 of these cameras in the very first year. You're going to see other changes on there. Probably the one that I would point out is that 1930s single lens reflex camera. If you have messed around with cameras at all, that single lens reflex is the first camera where the person looking into the viewfinder, the photographer looking into the viewfinder, actually sees what the camera lens sees. My grandmother was a big fan of taking photographs. She was born in 1891. Most of the photographs she took of her children, my parents and aunts and uncles, most of them have either their head cut off or their feet cut off because she was unable to see what the camera saw. She did not have a single lens reflex. She actually had a box Brownie camera. And so you lose part of it because you have to anticipate what the lens is able to pick up. Interesting note, 1975, digital photography begins. We did not have one in our family until almost 1990, but they're really not available to the general public for quite a while. Okay, any questions so far? Doing okay? All right, everybody's muted, so I'm assuming that we're moving on. Gatherings. So T stood for the type of photograph. G is going to stand for gatherings. And at this point, there's really good advice out there. And the first one is to work in committee. We can look at a photo of our family. Wayne can look at the photo that he's been given, but to get together with family and friends or family and people who might know others in the photo is really going to help us to create a timeline of family events. It's also going to help spark memories so that we learn other things about people in the photographs. Gatherings. We're going to look for things, as it says on this, we're going to look for the clothing. We're going to look for anything seasonal. We're going to look for landmarks. There is one in this photo that we're going to talk about in just a second. But for the most part, earlier photos are still going to surround birthdays, graduations, weddings, holidays, again, family reunions. There's even a lot of photographs of young men who have on long pants, and they seem to be just standing there, maybe next to the farm or next to another relative. And often those were breaching days. And so again, back in time, boys between the age of 3 and 8 or younger than that would wear short pants. And the day that they got their first pair of long pants was a big deal. And so they might commemorate that event with a pair of with a photograph. 3 to 8 is the typical age on the boy when they would get their first pair of long pants. However, if you had older brothers, you're going to wait until the older brothers outgrow those pants before you get them. And so there really is quite a big window, I guess, for that. Children were not photographed often. Again, part of that had to do with the Wiggles and just the fact that photography was kind of challenging for children. There is, however, one source that I was reading said that children who were not photographed in life were often photographed in death. And that in some cases, the first phone call when a child passed away was not to the coroner, but to the photographer. And the idea being that they wanted to have something by which to remember that child. And so it would be a grieving parents, really their first call would be to find a way to commemorate. If anybody wants to contribute, please feel free to mute your microphone, but anybody want to guess as to what this event is?
No, Angela and I, we have, hello?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah, we have a picture similar to that. There's a whole congregation, I guess, standing on the church steps and all dressed up in Western Missouri with no date.
These guys are dressed to the nines, aren't they? They've even got the top hats.
So, yeah, we're trying to figure out what date that took place, and we don't know.
Well, and the challenge you're going to run into with that is that men's fashions don't change nearly so much as women's fashions. So it's going to be more challenging to say, well, these tails look like they are from such and such a date, because tuxedo, especially in this case, those tuxedos are going to go for a long run of popularity. There is in this photo, there is a note in the window that says Notary Republic, or Notary Republic, sorry. And the building itself has a little bit of Art Deco going on. It's got some checkerboard brickwork across the front. So this is likely not a church gathering like the one that you're discussing. Anybody else want a quick guess?
Maybe a social club gathering, or I was thinking maybe the man in the middle might be the groom from a wedding.
What an excellent, these are excellent guesses, and you're looking at the right information. There is somewhat of a focus. At least it appears that his hat is proudly displayed in the front. This actually, it's the 1900 Howard Law School graduating class.
Oh, wow.
And that is why the Notary Public, they are getting they're processing their final papers probably. But it is their graduation day, and it was to be a dress event. I think about my kids and what they wore to their graduations, and I'm a little embarrassed by it, because these guys look like they were definitely celebrating.
That's amazing.
I have one question.
Yes.
Yeah, so the clothing, is there a website where we can go to see what type of clothing people wore in different years back then?
I am so glad you asked. I'm going to give you 8 of them at the end of this.
Oh, okay.
And then I'm going to tell you that there also are books. There are books that can be checked out from the library, picked up for home use, as well as books that can be used in the library. But you're ahead of the game, because you're figuring this out, that the process really involved is you looking at what you have and comparing it to something that has already been given a specific date. And by comparing what you have to what we already know, then that's going to help you narrow down that church photo. It's going to help you know when that might have occurred.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Okay.
you're ahead of me. You're taking everything. We could just quit here. We got the gist here. Anybody again? I'm sorry to make this audience participation, but I kind of like hearing from you too. There are 2 events, because we're talking about events. Anybody want to guess what the left side of the picture might commemorate?
The Statue of Liberty in the harbor in New York being opened, maybe?
You are dangerously close to the right answer.
Oh.
I'll tell you this, though, you're on the wrong side of the Atlantic.
Oh, okay.
But you've got many of the right elements.
Okay.
So we can look at the fact that these are small ships. That's definitely a tip, right? They appear to have on heavier clothing, coat, hat. So maybe preparing for a voyage. We can also look in the background to see buildings that are very well established, even a very large building in the background. These actually are passengers on a tender at Queenstown, Ireland. They are getting ready to leave. And in fact, this image had a title on it that was said, "Goodbye to Old Ireland." So your immigration tip was spot on. These are people who are gathering for a journey, but the ship's too small for it to be ocean going. So we have to put something else into that element, which is why your guess about New York Harbor was so close. These are ship's tenders. These are very much what we would have seen outside of Ellis Island, and your time frame is also pretty good. This is a 1903 photo, and the Statue of Liberty, its construction begins in 1876. It was a 100th birthday present. The picture on the right-hand side, different process. This is one of those albumin prints. Anybody want to guess what that one might be?
Say a wedding.
It is a wedding. You are exactly on it. It's a wedding photo, obviously not taken probably at the wedding because of the Interesting backdrop. I'll go with interesting. Kind of cartoony backdrop, and you can even see the line where the backdrop hits the floor of the studio. If you could see this close up, you would know that the gentleman has his wedding ring hung from a watch fob, from a chain across his belly. And her hand, even though it is her right hand, the ring is being displayed. And so we're going to talk weddings in just a moment. But no, just one other element about that particular photo. It was unusual in early photos for the woman to be standing and the man to be seated. Typically, it was the reverse in those early photos. However, in this particular case, the gentleman was over 6 foot tall and she was under 5 foot tall. And so photography is an art and has always been an art. And so the photographer probably said, yeah, this is not going to work. She's going to come up to basically the button on his coat. We need to find another way to make this happen. And then the last thing, very quickly, something that we could use to date this photo, and this is where we get to be really very much a detective with the photo itself. The chair that he's sitting on has iron casters. It has wheels. And so you're going to look at little bitty elements of these photographs in some cases to put a date on them. But that definitely, the style of the chair itself could help us to figure out a range for the date of that photo. Quick word about weddings. And as it shows you on this slide, we're going to look for the props. Tiaras were popular in 1901, but it had a very quick vogue. We're going to look for other elements in there, brooms and huppahs for Jewish ceremonies in particular. White dresses do not come around until Queen Victoria makes them popular in 1840. And in fact, it was more common in early photographs for the brides to wear popular styles and popular colors rather than to wear white. So the woman on the previous slide, as well as the woman in this photo, were both dressed pretty stylishly for their 1800s, 1880s photos. You'll also notice that colors had meaning. In 1870 and 1880, brown was a new fabric color. And so brown was considered to be extremely fashionable. Blue stood for fidelity. Purple, a bride wearing purple would have honored someone who passed away in the Civil War. The other thing, and this again has to do with cost, dresses were expensive then as they are now. Obviously not nearly as expensive, but it's not unusual to see pieces and parts of a wedding dress resurface. In other words, a lot of people could sew. And so to make that wedding dress cost practical, they would kind of dissect it. The skirt might be used later on. The bodice, the top part might be added to another skirt in later photos. And then again, the idea on the slide that wedding gowns are often handed down from generations. Okay, T stood for type, G stands for gathering, and now it's time to look at the information on the photo. So on this photo on the left-hand side, you can see that this family, these 4 girls, had their photo taken at the Pana Art Company in Pana, Illinois. So what we're going to do with that information, we're going to do a little bit of homework on the city of Pana. It's in Christian County, Illinois, middle of the state. And Pana is incorporated in 1857. In the 1907 Pana City Directory, there is no Pana Art Company. So automatically what we've done with just a little bit of research about the location is that we've narrowed this photo down between 1857 and 1907. So again, just with that information on the photo. Doing a little bit of additional research about the people in the photo, since I know who they are, I was able to kind of date this photo around 1882. We're going for a range of 5 to 10 years, but in 1882, the sleeves are kind of tight to the arm, curly bangs are in style, high necks, straighter bodices, skirts flare out some, but not nearly as much as they did 10 years prior, or actually 10 years later. So we're going to start looking at those fashion elements on the next part of this, but it's good to look at this here too. not only did clothing have its fashion, but the type of cards also had their fashions. Rounded corners are going to come out on these photos about 1870. The photographers, the studios are going to say, well, you know, we should be decorating our work a little bit here too. Scalloped edges are going to come around in the 1890s. You're going to find plain colors. You're going to find gold gilded edges across some of the columns over time. All of these, and even different lettering styles, have their own time frame that we can use to date a photo. On the right-hand side is an image with a stamp on it. And that stamp is a bonus for you, because between June of 1864 and August of 1866, the US government imposed a tax on, basically on photographs, but on other things too, on things that were considered luxury items. And so during that 2-year window, if you have a photograph with a stamp on the back, you're in that zone between 1864 and 1866, because in 1866, everybody was upset about it and they finally got rid of it. So if you do see that, you've got a very small window. The way it worked, the cost of the stamp was applied to the customer's bill, and the photographer would put the stamp on to the back of the images, back of the card, and then initial it as actually canceled. So it never went to the post office. It's not that type of stamp, but it was a tax that was on there. It was canceled then with their initials. I guess 2 other things I should point out on this one. You need to be careful trying to date photos facially. It's tough. Different people hold their age differently. In this particular photo, to me, one of the younger women in the photo is the one on the far left, and yet she is the older of the 4 girls. And the other thing, little photographer's trick, the woman in the back in the middle is the younger sister, and to make the image look right, they put her up on a box to take the photo. There's actually a diary entry about the day that they went to have this photo taken, so it has a little special meaning along the way. So finally, we're to the fashion part of this class, and we're going to look at everything. We're going to look at the dress style. We're going to look at the length, how long the skirt is, how long the bodice, the top part is, how are the sleeves cut. We're going to look at hair and accessories also. For the guys, we're going to look at largely the cut of the lapel. That seems to be something that changes along with the ties, neckties, hats, shirt collars also. And for guys, the big trend in facial hair, not regular hair listing. By the way, photo, normal class, 1899, normal class at Roger Williams University in Nashville. Normal classes would have been teacher colleges for the most part. So again, looking at this woman, we're going to see that her hair is up. She's got curls. That's very typical of the 1890s. Her style of sleeve has a little bit of a cap at the top of the sleeve where it comes up. Her bodice is relatively straight and the skirt is cut fairly down. It's got some gathers in it. And so we're going to use that. In 1880, the idea of a bustle goes away. And in 1895, women's sleeves were crazy. They had not only the little cap at the top, but the area where their arm was called a leg of mutton sleeve, because it puffed way out and then it cut down to a very tight cuff down on the lower part of the arm. And they called them leg of mutton sleeves because it looked like a lamb's leg sitting there on their arm. But that was popular in the mid 1890s. It also goes out of style in 1900. So again, knowing a little bit about the woman in this photo, using some prior research, this is going to be about 1893, somewhere between 1892 and 1897 photograph. But those are the things we're going to look for: hair, sleeves, bodice, skirt. When we're looking at gentlemen, we're going to look at their hairstyle, but again, facial hair is probably the bigger giveaway in that one. We're going to look at the style of the collar and the necktie. Jacket type has to do with fabric. And then we're going to look at whether it has a skinny lapel or a long, deep lapel. And in this case, beards were popular. He's got that hard card collar around his neck, and the lapel sits super high. The gentleman in the wedding photograph on the page with the Irish emigration, I always thought he was just a huge man who couldn't button his jacket, because only button in that particular photo is the very top button. But as you look at more and more of these photos, that was style back then. They buttoned the top button and left the rest of them hanging open. So maybe he wasn't as large as I perhaps thought. He has a loose bow necktie. This is going to be very typical from the mid to late 1800s or 1880s even. His jacket fabric looks to be a heavier fabric. That could be because it was a winter photograph. It could have been taken, late in the season. But again, the lapel is short compared to what happens in the 1870s. This particular photo is somewhere around 1885 to 1890. Again, we're in Pana, Illinois. We've got CB Tracy Studios on Locust. So we could use city directories to find out when that studio was in operation.
I've got a question.
Yes, ma'am. Sure.
When we were looking at the gentleman just before, the thought occurred to me, what if a person, they weren't quite so prosperous and they were wearing like used clothing or something, they weren't quite up to date in their clothing. I mean, I think that might be kind of counterintuitive, because if you could afford to have a photograph taken, you might be in the middle class where your clothing would be up to date. But I just thought about this, perhaps certain segments of our society might not have their clothing might be hand-me-downs or used clothing or whatever.
Absolutely. And in fact, in the very beginning, I think at the very, very beginning, I told you I was going to lose my credibility by telling you there's too many factors to really play this game within a smaller than a range of years. A lot of studios had clothing available for people to use in their photos.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Still another element that really throws this haywire. It could be that when you got there, you said, we need to, what have you got available for us? Or you arranged your appointment with a photographer that had a stash of clothing available. The other thing, and again, you said it may be just intuitive. We live in the Midwest, and we do not get the fashions firsthand.
Right.
Fashions come in on two coasts, one in particular. So the bulk of our fashion still comes from New York, and it works its way to Los Angeles, and then it kind of works its way into the middle. And so whether it's cost related or whether it's transportation and communication related, you've got economics playing, but you also have geography that keeps you from being able to date a photograph within too small a range.
Okay.
But you're absolutely right. And you may have people sharing with neighbors, we're going to go have our pictures taken. What do you got? I've got a nice dress. Why don't you borrow this one? Absolutely.
Okay, great.
I think about the photos down in the novelty photos down in the Ozarks where you put on, okay, this is pre-COVID, where you put on the same clothes that the person before you had on to have your old-timey photo taken.
Right.
That's kind of how I imagined the studios back then. They had more contemporary clothing than something that would represent the past. Okay. Good point. 20th century photos are particularly hard to date. Some of that has to do with the fact that, again, photography is available to the masses at this point in time. So we're losing some of those earlier tips about the studio name being on the front and whatever other information. So it's going to be a little bit harder. As the Victorian age, that's going to be 1830s through 1900. As the Victorian age turns into the Edwardian age, fashions are going to be on the move as well. So Victorian age, those photos prior to 1900, it was all about conservatism because Victoria was a conservative. And while we don't all live in England, our fashions were largely still driven by British fashions. Edwardian age, it gets to be kind of all over the place. In the early 1900s, you can see that the emphasis for women is going to be on curves. This is where those corsets are going to come in to tighten everything down so that the curves are even bigger than a woman's natural body might have been. You're going to find that hair for women in the early 1900s gets huge. And part of that, they even had pads that they used to put underneath. So they'd put down a pad and flip hair over the top of it to make an even larger hairstyle. But part of that was because hats were big and they needed to be affixed to the head. And so if they put that cushion and covered it up with hair, they had something to pin the hat into without it being the woman's hair, or worse, I guess. Hems are going to drop down to the ground again. You're going to find in men's styles, they're going to have those high starched collars, but we're going to start watching men's hats in the 1900s because Homburgs, bowlers, cloth caps, boaters, top hats, all of these different hat styles have their own frame, their own time frame. And so for men, hats, with the exception of our Howard graduating class, where it would be a top hat because they were wearing tails, hats are going to help us determine what time frame we're looking for. 1913, I want to stop, it's not on this slide, but in 1913, for women, V-necks came into style. The very first V-neck dresses showing just ever so small amount of neck. And they were called pneumonia blouses in the advertising. It came with a certain amount of scandal that they'd actually have an open collar, but a V-neck was called a pneumonia blouse, which I can't let go. For World War I, we are going to start seeing shorter skirts, fuller skirts. And because of women's participation in the war effort, the factory and farm work that was being done by women while the men were at war, you're going to see trousers. Women are going to start wearing pants. Again, the guys, it's all about the hats. 1920s, we all know about the flappers, but 1920s are elaborate costuming. It's all about the fun. It's about the accessories and the feathers and the beads and anything that can make it look for fun. Guys are going to have knickerbockers, the short cut off at the sock pants, double-breasted jackets. So everything is just going to be very two-tone shoes. Things are going to be very decorative. And that's also the Art Deco age from an artistic perspective, from an architectural perspective. The crash takes the wind out of some of that. The 1930s are less flamboyant. Styles for women are going to be much more feminine than they would have been coming out of World War I. And guys' trousers are going to be huge. They're going to be the zoot suit, wide pants. Men's jackets are going to be short, and the lapels are going to get wider. So again, we're going to watch different elements of the clothing. In 1940, everything goes a lot of different directions. Fashion really takes off to become personal. So we're not even going to venture into that because it would take its own presentation slides to go from 1940 on. Talking about, and I promise to get to websites that are going to help you, but this is actually kind of the beginning of that. Before 1950, in 1950, teenage fashions start being marketed. So prior to about 1950, children are going to be dressing like young adults. And then in 1950, again, that changes and they really start saying, hey, you're a teenager, you should dress differently. This is going to be from the 1900s. Anybody want to guess a decade? Or point out an element that would help us to pick a decade? Yeah, the guy's got on a vest. He's got on a three-piece suit, doesn't he? How about the tie? A little bit wider? A little bit wider tie. The woman is wearing a different fabric than we've seen in older photos. It's got that little bit of nylon, maybe silkish to it. It does have a V-neck, so we know it's after 1913. Her glasses have their own style to them. They're wire rim.
Yes. You know, something about his jacket, the lapels, the haircut. I don't know why. It reminded me of Bonnie and Clyde, and that was in the 30s.
You are
But-
spot on. That is spot on. This photo is absolutely from the 1930s. And you're right. We're going to look at his haircut. He's also clean shaven, and that has
Yes.
its own style time. And that those lapels are super wide compared to the ones that we saw from the late 1800s and earlier photos. So the image of the child, and the first time I taught this class, a gentleman said, that boy should not have that shirt tucked in. That is not Navy apparel. Navy sailors did not tuck their shirts in. However, I'm sure that either the mom or the dad in that family said, tuck your shirt in, we're having our picture taken. So anyway, the young boy has on this Navy uniform, clearly not uniform, but play suits, probably the better way to say that. And what one of my colleagues did, she did a Google search. She did a Google image search for young boy sailor suit, I think is what she typed in there. And she ended up on a vintage clothing website that had the images you see in color, in blue, on this screen. And it is exactly the outfit that the little kid has on in that picture. And so by looking at a vintage clothing images, on a vintage clothing website, she was able, and it said, this suit dates set 1937. You know, you might want to purchase this vintage 1937 boys sailor suit. And so we know it's somewhere around 1937 if that shop owner has done their homework. But you'd be surprised what you can find just simply out on Google as far as old costumes. Again, we would go through with this and say, do we know the woman? Do we know the man? And how does that help us determine the age of that boy? Because we would use our own research then to figure out about when this photo was taken. The person who did the Google search, those were her grandparents, so she knew exactly how old that boy was. That's her dad. So if we're being photo detectives, I'm going to tell you one more thing, but I'm going to ask it in this format. How many boys are in each of these photos? Let's do the one on the right first. Be brave.
3.
3.
3.
The one on the left, we absolutely have 3.
Oh, okay.
You're fine, you're fine. I'm not sure how you knew that, but I'm going to tell you that, and again, this is where style lets me down quite a bit. Back in the day, the rule was boys' hair was parted on the side, girls' hair was parted down the middle.
Huh.
Oh.
It was the protocol. It was what was mostly followed by families. And so the young lady with the 2 bows, with her hair parted down the middle, had 3 brothers. The brother to the far left is still wearing a dress.
Yes.
Because and it isn't a dress, it's a gown, because he's a young boy. But the fact that his hair is parted on the side gives it away that he is a brother, not another sister. Frankly, the boy that is, I guess what I would call the second oldest, he has on a very, almost effeminate outfit, you know, great big bow and lots of ruffles and things, but he has long hair, but he is a brother also. His hair is parted on the side. Now I say that bangs went out of style. I'm going to tell you my hair is always parted on the side and I've always got bangs. So these things, they let us down a little bit. My mother, when I was growing up, parted my hair on the side. I still do today. So she was not aware of the conventions of the 1800s, only of the mid 1900s, and my hair is almost always on the side. So again, you can't follow that rule, but if you're looking at it, it's a good guideline to kind of look at. The picture on the right are the same 2 boys that are the younger 2 on the left. So the younger 2 boys on the left become the older 2 boys on the right about 10 years later. You can start matching facial features. If you know the information, you can go, okay, I know which 2 these are. They look enough like they used to.
Yes.
But that's another way to back up that the person to the far, the young man to the far, far, far left of your screen is in fact a young boy. So the rest of what we would look on this as far as dating the photos, again, we've got Fritz Studio in Waterloo, Illinois. We can also notice, and I've drawn a line across there so you can see the scalloped edges that have been cut out on the edge of the photo itself on the left. We also have embossing that's been done on the photo on the right, on the cabinet card on the, or the CDV on the right. So we can take those, what was happening at the time from a design standpoint to again start dating these photos. We could look at the cap, we could look at all kinds of things, the clothing itself. Those big bows on the older boys, that's very late 1800s, very 1890s for the big bows. Good job though on the three boys. So we're gonna look also kind of going from the card itself, the fashion of the card, the fashion of the part around the photo. We're also gonna look at those backdrops. We're gonna look at poses. The bicycle, the man on the bicycle in the top right, he's on a bike that was popular in the 1870s and 1880s, okay? I'm not gonna ask you to respond to this one, but my question would be, is it a moving photo? Is he riding and this is an action photo? And hopefully you would very quickly say, no, it took 20 to 30 minutes to take a photo. There's no way to take an action photo at that point in time. So he's posing there, which again is going to tell us something about the person in the photo. There is a reason that that bicycle is important to him and important enough for him to sit in that pose for 20 to 30 minutes to have the image created. And in fact, this particular gentleman was, he was the 6-day bicycle rider of the world in 1891. He was a bicyclist, a champion bicyclist. But we can look at the background. It's very much out in nature, and we're kind of looking at it until you see the part where the backdrop hits the floor, because backdrops also are going to change over the process. Poses, the woman in the left has something very important in her left hand. Whatever it is, it's important. And so we would look, if we know who that person is, we would look to see what events happened in her life that would cause her to have a scroll in her hand. That is not a common prop, not something that the photographer would say, you need to be holding something, here's a roll of paper. Okay, so that roll of paper is some sort of graduation parchment, something, some certificate of importance. And in fact, she went to midwife college. That is her certificate saying that she was a certified midwife in Chicago. Pictures taken in St. Louis. Her degree was from Chicago. We can look at poses. A lot of the 1860s, you're going to see full length. As it gets closer, the rule of thumb is that the closer the subject is to the camera, the later the photo. And some of that has to do with the clarity. Those early cameras could not discern clear information, so the photos were mostly taken further away. The closer it gets, the closer the subject gets to the camera, the more recent the photo. Head and shoulders photos were popular in the 1890s. The over-the-shoulder ingenue pictures were popular in the 1920s. So again, fashion is not just about the clothing they're wearing, but about the way they're posed and what information we can discern from the rest of the photo. Backdrops started off very plain. They went to very elaborate, and then they went through this outdoorsy method. Plain, mostly 1860s, you start having almost like the backdrop on a play. Studios are going to use those theatrical backdrops, pretty much a single drape. Children are going to be held or they're going to be tied up. Oh, you might see photographs with a child where it seems to be just the child and then there's this drape around them. And usually what those were, and they were back in the 1870s and 80s, in order to photograph a child, somebody had to hold the child still. And so they would have the mother hold the child with her arms, and then they would drape her out. They'd put drape over her face and drape over her arms to remove her from the photo. But in the meantime, while the image was being created, the kid was being restrained physically by the mom, I guess, or the dad. But for the most part, what I've read is it's the mom who got to hang on to the kid. You do have, as we get into the 1900s, those backdrops start looking like your home, or like the home maybe that you want to have, or that the photographer wants to illustrate in the background. But they get very home-like from the outside views to the inside views. Cameras can do close-ups by then. That helps. So military photos, we've got just a couple more slides. Dating military photos, the information on the slide is exactly what you need. We're going to look again at the style of the uniform itself. The cover is the cap, the hat, any other accessories in the picture. We're going to look to see if there's any rank, any type of information on the uniform itself, whether it's a button on the collar, whether it's epaulets, whether it's bars, whether it's got sergeant stripes, whatever is on there that will help us know if there is military rank involved, what rank it is, because then we can follow military records to date the photo. We want to look in the background to see if there's anything identifiable that can help us know where the photo was taken. Again, the photograph of the Buffalo soldier in the very front, he's in a 5-button sack coat. And the last time, it's actually Dakota territory, so unlikely that it's anybody maybe in this area. But the last time I taught this class, a woman goes, "Oh my gosh, I have that same photo." And she held up a photo in her hand that had her soldier in that exact same 5-button coat with the small collar, no lapel. It was a military jacket. So your question about, do you have websites where we can match our photos to those photos? That's exactly what we'll do with this also. Be careful, I guess, looking at someone in uniform and looking for their military records. The gentleman top left was a West Point cadet until he had too many demerits, and then he was no longer a West Point cadet. So I cannot find military records for him because that was not the way it ended up for him. So it's a good place to start, but there are wrinkles in this process. Some reminders. You're going to use your own personal research and online to guide this process. We want to remember again that different processes were in vogue, were popular at the same time, because we can't really rule out one over the other. We want to make sure that we're not missing things in the background, on the foreground, on the photo itself. The blue picture up in the top, that's called cyanotype. It was popular for a significant part of time, really from the middle, I think it was like 1870 to 1890. That was a very popular print. But if that house had house numbers on it, that would have been really wonderful. We would have known where that was taken. That would have helped us know when that was taken. And then again, aim for a range of dates. It's very, very challenging to come up with just the one. In the image of the small child, if you haven't guessed that's a death photo, you need to think that through, because they would not photograph a sleeping child. That photo was professionally done, and it was done as a photo to memorialize that child. So here's your website page. If you're looking at the handout that was sent to you by Wayne, it's going to be your slide 23, second to last slide on there. I had just added the Library of, LOC, that very top one. www.loc stands for Library of Congress. These are all free websites. They're going to help you to come up with photos. I typed in the words 1880s photos, and it came up. Library of Congress website popped up with a whole bunch of them. So you want to make sure that you're using sources that are already dated, because you're going to compare yours. That's how you're going to start narrowing down the range, that plus your personal family research. So these are just a couple. There's 7 of them on there. There are some books within the Mid-Continent Public Library system. One of the better ones is called Dating Old Photographs. Simple enough. There's actually also a More Dating Old Photographs. And both of those books are just simply picture books. They are page upon page upon page, but the photos in them are presented by range of dates. So there are photos from 1840 to 1845, 2 pages, 3 pages, however many. And then the next set of photos starts in 1845 to 1850. So with those 5-year ranges and your ability to look at them, to match the clothing style, to match anything else in the backdrop, that's how you're going to best get a handle on that if your personal research isn't getting it done for you. We are at the end of this presentation, with the exception of telling you that we've got a whole lot of classes we're running online right now. Any one of these classes you can listen to at your own speed, at your own convenience, and just really to take advantage of the opportunity to keep working on your genealogy while you're staying home, while you're being safe. And I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I'm going to get out of here to answer any questions.
I have a question.
Yes.
It's a kind of a 2-part question, and they're related. Do you offer any classes on conserving old photographs?
So,
and the second part is, I have one photo and it's sort of, it's fading. It's turning black. And so I'm a little bit leery of scanning it, you know, and exposing it to any more light. But it seems like it's some sort of process that is darkening. It's kind of metallic looking. And it's the only image I have of this one ancestor. So I'm a little leery of doing anything until maybe I'll take a photo of it with my camera, you know.
The answer to your question, there are, we don't personally have a presentation. I know we have a gentleman who comes in to present periodically on photo preservation. I can certainly look that up and see if he's coming in the near future and get that to Wayne, because he's the contact that I have here. And then he can spread it out to anybody who'd like that. I will tell you, photographs react poorly to 3 things: water, heat, and light. Mm-hmm. And so you need to be very careful with the old photos that you have, that you're not exposing them to undue amounts of water. And it's really changes in temperature more than heat. It's anything that causes the photo itself to go through spells of different temperature, and then light. And what we want to do with our photos, because I've actually been to a presentation on this, we want to take pictures of them. We want to take a snapshot of them and then put the original one away. You want to use acid-free packaging in some way, whether it's, we call them top loaders. They're the plastic sheets that you drop things into, but you want to get special archival top loaders that are acid-free, because acid will eat up the rest of the ink or the albumin on those. And you want to put them away. I have some very old photos that are very important to me hanging in a place that I finally realized was damaging the photo. And so I took pictures of them and I replaced the pictures on my wall with photographs of them. They're still there, but those photos then will be around for another generation. And I don't think they were going to be initially. There's also software out there that, and I don't have any offhand that I can give you, but there's software that you can use to modify, kind of like Photoshop, to modify the photo, to increase the contrast, to increase the intensity of the photo. So you might be able to scan your photo and then kind of play around with software or with editing software. See if you can bring some of it back. Again, put the original away in a safe manner, but see if you can't bring enough of it back by tweaking it. We had a gentleman in here that was working on a diary page, and the diary itself, you know, the person had written on both the front and the back, and the ink had bled through the paper over time. And a lot of us have seen that in you know, stuff that wasn't well preserved, or even back then they didn't even think about it particularly. He had used some editing software to extract that background image. So I know it's out there, and sometimes that's what we need. We need to extract some of the background from it so that we can sharpen the image that we are actually wanting to see.
Okay,
Help you
thank you.
some?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else? Best method for writing on identifying an old photo. Ooh, good website. There's a website here, www.magickc.org/membership-html. That's you guys. The best method for writing on an old photograph is to not write on the old photograph. It's a terrible answer, right? My grandmother, born 1891, took her ink pen and wrote on the back of all of her photos so that we would know who they were. And then she put them together, stacked in a sleeve. And over time, the ink from the back of one photo became a part of the front of another one. The good news is there were multiple photos. So a lot of these were preserved over time. And yes, I'm glad I know who's in them, but never, never, never use ink. You don't want to use anything that bleeds through. So Sharpie's not going to be your best option either. I guess light pencil if you had to do that. But the best answer is to take a photograph, take a scan of the image, right on the scan, right on the, you know, if you have a 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with the image at the top, put your information at the bottom so that you know exactly who's in there and it can be preserved. But you really don't want to write on the back of a photo. Anything can take away from a photo, or especially if it's pressed up against another one. So we really want to try to avoid that. Let's see, I don't see anything else in the chat. What else can I do for you? Yolanda?
No.
Okay.
I'm taking notes.
Your screen just lit up.
Oh.
Was there a particular time period where, I guess, in portraits, they begin to actually smile?
You know, I'm going to have to answer that with the answer that it comes with the development of the camera, with the further development. I have some images and I can't imagine how long they had to sit there, but somewhere around, it seems like 1880 might be a breaking point. Certainly the photos before that, you were very stern and you know, the photographers would say to use your resting face. So your resting face was going to be whatever wasn't going to cause the muscles in your cheeks to absolutely spaz out, for lack of a better term, you know, during the photography session. But it seems like after 1880, we're starting to add a lot of different photographic elements. That's when film cameras are going to come around. That's when photography seemed to be there to stay at that point in time. Right after that, we start getting black and white film where you're not doing the albumin prints anymore. So there's just a big wave of innovation between 1800 and 1900. You have to also remember that some of that was stylistic. I was married in the 1980s and it took me 10 years to get my husband to smile in a picture. And so that's, you know, we're talking regular photography at that point in time, but he's like, no, I'm the dad, I should look, you know, and I said, happy, you should look happy. Let's try that one for a change. So, you know, some of this also has to do, it could be custom, could be the family custom, it could be the custom of whoever was taking it, the group, if it was a group photo. I don't know, I would say that you're probably looking at the late 1800s simply because of the different innovations at that point in time. I learned not to assume the child in the dress is a girl. Good. Good. Anything else I can do for you?
Well, I just can't wait to take our photos, you know, to the library for you to look them over. So I'm gonna relate this to Angela when we get out of Zoom and let her know.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, I'm going to go ahead and leave you all. If you think of anything else and you want to call the library, 816-252-7228. And we are more than answering phones. We help people every day. We'll also help you with your, I think you said roadblocks was the word that I heard earlier in the meeting, or new information found. We've all got them. Mine is a William Smith. I will take all sympathy possible. I got a William Smith somewhere in Missouri that I can't find that I'm still looking for after 20 years. So we know roadblocks come up and we're happy to help you as we can. So thank you for inviting me. It's
Wait a minute, before you go, what is your name again?
My name is Kim.
Camera?
Kimberly.
Oh, Kim. Okay.
Kimberly is I'm in trouble with my parents' name, but I go by Kim.
Kim, okay.
Some of you may have those names. Kimberly is why is the gas out of the car? Why did you park it on empty? Kimberly stretched out.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm Kim. So thank you again. I'm gonna let you get back to your meeting. And again, let me know how I can be of help to you in the future. Thanks a lot
Thank
for
you.
inviting me.
Thank you, Kim.
Thank you.